Russian athletes will be able to compete in these Rio 2016 Olympic Games.
Also coming up, fresh divisions are emerging within the Republican Party over its presidential nominee, Donald Trump. Plus, a bridge collapses on the main route from Goa to Mumbai. 2 buses and several cars are feared to have been swept away downriver. Hello, it is the most dramatic of emergency landings. A passenger jet forced to touch down, apparently without its landing gear. The incident happened at Dubai International Airport to a plane arriving from southern India. All the 300 passengers managed to evacuate before, just a few minutes later, the fuselage was engulfed in smoke and flames, though one firefighter was killed. Well, passengers have been speaking about their narrow escape, as our transport correspondent Richard Westcott reports.
People in that plane.
You can only imagine what it must have been like for everyone on board. A normal landing turns to chaos as the aircraft skids along on its belly, smoke pouring from the cabin. Then it gets even worse. An explosion, probably fuel, sends a piece of the aircraft spinning through the air, although we don't know if everyone was off by that stage. 300 people escaped down these inflatable slides. They say they got no warning anything was wrong.
We have not heard any announcement or anything, but it was a big noise. The smoke was coming inside, so immediately they asked us to evacuate. So we have escaped from the emergency exit. So we were jumping down.
Yeah, all the people were shouting because all the children and women, everybody was there. All the people was shouting, crying.
This is what it looked like from another aircraft sitting nearby.
I just turned and we just saw this plane on its side, the wings down, sparks coming off on fire. It was just absolutely horrific. We saw the whole thing. It was crazy.
The chairman of Emirates says everything seemed fine as the aircraft approached Dubai. Yet the plane doesn't seem to have had its wheels down when it hit the ground. We don't yet know if it was down to a mechanical problem, a mistake by the pilots, or a bit of both. Still, it's incredible all the passengers walked away from this alive. Richard Westcott, BBC News.
Well, for more, we can speak to Sean Muffet, an aviation analyst who is in Gloucestershire in the UK. Any idea as yet from the information that we have as to why this crash happened?
Hello, Geeta. No, sadly not. It seems to be a great mystery. Why they would be coming down without wheels, I understand that from at some stage, air traffic control said, check your undercarriage down. It's not clear whether actually they were coming down without wheels throughout the whole approach, or whether the wheels were down and then when the aircraft elected to do a go-around, which means that they put the power on the engines and they go around and try and do another approach, they apparently elected to do that. They were cleared to do it by air traffic control. Whether they then put the wheels up and the aircraft continued sinking, we just don't know at the moment what happened. I think what is worth considering, though, is that this aeroplane skidded along the runway, as Richard Westcott was saying, and an enormous fire ensued, and yet the cabin crew and the flight crew managed to get all 300 people on that aeroplane off the aeroplane without anybody being killed. Of course, it's dreadful that one of the emergency crew has apparently died in fighting the fire, but nonetheless, I think this is an extraordinary event.
What will the investigators now look at, and how quickly would you expect an explanation?
Well, as to how quickly, who knows? That is entirely up to probably the Emirates government, and we don't know how quickly we'll hear. What they will be looking for, of course, are the 2 important recorders in the aeroplane, sometimes in one box, sometimes in 2 separate ones, the flight data recorder, the cockpit voice recorder, which will tell them much more precisely what was actually happening and in the final seconds of that approach. And of course, earlier as well, if that was significant. I suspect that they will be able to get those 2 recorders out of the aircraft without too much trouble. It seems as if the back end of the aircraft, the tailplane area, was relatively untouched by the fire, although of course we can't be sure. And these recorders are very damage resistant. They're built to withstand fires and huge impacts and all those other things. So they will probably be able to get very good information out of that. And of course, the crew, as the passengers are still alive, they will be able to tell them, what went on. So there shouldn't be too much trouble finding out what actually happened here.
OK, we will leave it there. Sean Moffat, thanks so much.
Thanks.
Now, 2 days before the official start of the Games, the Olympic torch has arrived in Rio, but tensions remain between Olympic chiefs and the World Anti-Doping Agency. There are Russian athletes who still don't know if they're going to be able to compete. Let's go live to Rio, and Babita Sharma. Looks stunning where you are, Babita.
Yeah, it's fantastic, isn't it, here, Geeta? We are live on Copacabana Beach in Rio, and we're just 48 hours away from the opening ceremony on Friday at the Maracanã Stadium. But as you said, the sporting action has already begun here today. The first round of the women's football has been taking place in the Olympic Stadium. Sweden triumphed against South Africa 1-0 in that first round match. And within the last minute and a half, Canada are currently playing Australia. Just 60 seconds into that match getting underway in Sao Paulo, Janine Beckie was the goal scorer for Canada, so they're just ahead in that. And as you said, sporting action taking place, but still we are waiting to find out from the International Olympic Committee whether or not some 250 Russian athletes will finally be given the green light to compete in these games. They are still waiting to find out. We were told that we would know at some point today, but the wait continues for them. But as you said, it's been a historic day here today for Rio, because finally, after an epic journey, some 20,000 kilometres across Brazil, the Olympic torch arrived in Rio. As our sports editor, Dan Rowan, now reports.
After a journey across Brazil, this morning's arrival of the Olympic torch in Rio was a symbolic moment. In 2 days' time, it'll be the focal point of the opening ceremony. But the build-up to these games has been a troubled one, dominated by the Russian doping scandal. Under severe pressure, the International Olympic Committee is meeting here this week amid a crisis of faith in its leadership. And Britain's most successful Olympian told me the start of the sport cannot come soon enough.
Let's just keep our fingers crossed. Once the games start, there's going to be some amazing performances across the board from all the countries, not just from GB. Just something that we can all celebrate and remember what the point of the Olympic Games is as well. It's about bringing the world together and celebrating humanity, celebrating sport. And just not focusing on the negative issues all the time.
But are the Games worth the billions they cost? London 2012 helped transform East London, and most of the venues are in use, but failed to make Britain a more active nation. The Sochi Winter Games were the most expensive ever, and arguably the most damaging, given the revelations of state-sponsored doping. And now there's Rio. The setting is hard to beat, but it's struggled with opposition, recession, and concerns over Zika, pollution and security. IOC President Thomas Bach has pledged to reduce the cost of bidding to stage the Games. But some want other values prioritised. Campaigners here in Rio insisting that mega events like this are too often linked to human rights abuses and corruption.
If the IOC and the international federations don't react, if they just continue as they did and say, well, we don't care, then it might be the end of the Olympic Games, at least as games with a value, with a message to the world, what is laid down in the Olympic Charter.
But here in Rio, it's evident that the Games remain big business, with billions of pounds generated in sponsorship and broadcasting revenue each Olympic cycle. And there are some Western cities that still want to play host.
In 2024, I want to win a gold.
Los Angeles, one of those bidding to secure the Games for 2024.
There is sustainability, there is infrastructure. Los Angeles has 97% of our permanent venues are already built. We only have to build one permanent venue. So we have the facilities. We're a sporting town. 88% of our residents in our town want to bring the Games back to the city of Los Angeles.
This afternoon, the sport began, the women's football tournament, in front of only a few hundred spectators. Organisers will hope the atmosphere builds as the Games progress and provides the showpiece the Olympic movement now needs. Dan Rowan, BBC News, Rio.
But it was a momentous moment here, Gita, when that torch arrived here, because leaving from the city, making its way through to Rio, being greeted by the mayor, Eduardo Paes, who said this was indeed a very special moment that all Brazilians should be able to enjoy, which is why tomorrow on Thursday they've declared a public holiday, as that torch will make its way through the city. And we're expecting that many people, thousands in fact, will come out on the streets to greet it.
And Babita, we did see today, coming into the newsroom, shots of an empty stadium as one of the football matches, I think, got underway. Do you think, though, that the country is just going to really get behind the games now?
We get a sense, as we've been here the last few days, that there is a lot of excitement and anticipation building about the games. And I think that for many people, as we've been speaking to, they didn't actually understand that the games had officially begun today with the women's first round in the football. For Brazilians here in particular, for the locals, Brazilian football is all about the men's football. So it's perhaps no surprise that there were lots of empty seats in the Olympic Stadium for that Sweden against South Africa match earlier on today. But I think that when the games get underway in full swing, if you like, next week, following the opening ceremony on Friday and over the weekend, that we will see more and more of the tickets being sold, and a lot of the stadiums that have been built, and the Maracanã, for example, and the Olympic Park being full of lots of spectators, because we still understand now that there's probably about 15% of tickets left, which is pretty good going.
Babita, thanks very much indeed. My children still certainly very excited and trying to figure out how to watch the games as much as possible, sadly, on the television. Enjoy the next few days. Thank you. Well, if you want to keep up to date with all our coverage, there is much more on the website and on our mobile app. Much more from Rio directly, and a full breakdown of where the events are, and also more on the controversy over Russia and doping. BBC.com/Olympics. Let's go to the United States now, and fresh divisions are emerging within the Republican Party over its presidential candidate, Donald Trump. Major Republican donor Meg Whitman has endorsed his rival, Hillary Clinton, saying Mr. Trump was a dishonest demagogue and it was time to put country first before party. In the latest controversy, Mr. Trump has refused to support two senior figures in his own party. Well, let's speak now to Barbara Plett-Usher, our correspondent in Washington. Barbara, just first of all, on those two figures that have not been endorsed, how significant is that, and how will that go down with Republican voters, do you think?
Well, it is significant because the presidential candidate is usually seen as the standard bearer of the party, and so he would be expected to support and endorse all of the congressional Republicans who are also running to be reelected in office, and for him to basically say quite clearly that he wasn't going to, at this point anyway, back two senior members of the party, including the House Speaker Paul Ryan and the Senator from Arizona John McCain, the subtext being because they had criticized him in the past, is quite a big deal for the party, and the party responded furiously. The leaders of the party, the donors, the strategists, for them this is sort of the latest example of a campaign. They're not quite sure what's going on with it anymore. People have said that they feel that the message is out of control because, of course, this comes off the back of about 5 days during which Mr. Trump has been targeting a Muslim American family whose son died in Afghanistan, whose son is effectively a war hero, and therefore senior Republicans have also felt they needed to come out and distance themselves from those kinds of statements. Having said that, though, the vast majority of them are only distancing themselves. They have not defected. They are not abandoning Mr. Trump. He did, of course, get 13 million votes, and especially members of Congress who are running to be reelected don't want to alienate that constituency.
Meg Whitman, though, has said she is backing Hillary Clinton. And I suppose one big question is how many more Republicans, senior Republicans, will move over the next few months? I know you can't answer that necessarily, but the Republican campaign must be, well, Trump's campaign certainly must be worried.
Yes, she and a number of other Republicans have said that they will back Hillary Clinton. Like I said, there certainly isn't a mass defection at the moment, and I think it will be a political calculation about their own political careers as to whether they decide it's in their interest to eventually defect. But I should say that it has given a certain bump to Mrs. Clinton's campaign. She, in her speech at the Democratic National Convention last week, did make part of it an appeal to Republicans to join her. She said, "We are going to be representing all people, members of all different parties," and there have been a number who have taken her up on that. And I think her campaign is making as much as it can out of this latest business with Mr. Trump criticizing the parents of the dead soldier. They have put out an email with all of the negative coverage that has brought and all of the negative statements from Republican candidates, aware that his own advisors have said this is counterproductive. You should be attacking Mrs. Clinton, not these people. So as far as the Clinton campaign is going, I think they're quite pleased with the results.
Barbara, thanks very much there live in Washington for us. The Italian authorities are investigating whether so-called Islamic State is now involved in organising and profiting from the passage of migrants from Libya to Italy. The crossing is becoming more popular as other routes close down, but it's increasingly dangerous. More than 3,000 migrants or refugees have died in the Mediterranean this year. Our correspondent Chris Buckler joined a rescue ship operated by the charity MSF and sent this report.
Each day the Mediterranean appears, tempting those who see it as a crossing to Europe. But even if they are able to ignore the risks and reality of what that means, others can't. Search and rescue teams have become a fixture on this ocean. They're a necessity to deal with the overloaded boats that leave the Libyan coast daily, with no hope of reaching their intended destination.
We have approximately 25 females, 4 children, 1 pregnant woman. How far along are you? 8 months.
All 138 people in this boat relied on being rescued. They had with them no supplies, nor any obvious way of finding Europe.
I was afraid. I was really afraid. In Libya, I was put in prison with my children. I had to pay money in order to get out. I put my life and my children's life on the line to come here. In this land, my children can go to school, we can live in peace. What else is there?
There is joy for this group. They've found safe passage. After travelling from countries across Africa, including Gambia, Sudan and Nigeria. But over the last fortnight, a dozen bodies a day have been washing up on the beaches of Libya. Near to the site of this rescue, another boat lay floating in the water, possessions still inside, and no sign of what happened to those who were once in it.
The International Organization for Migration says that already this year, internationally, more than 4,000 refugees and migrants have died. And it's thought around 3/4 of them drowned here in the Mediterranean Sea.
Médecins Sans Frontières, which operates this rescue ship, is now refusing money from European governments because it says their policies are not helping refugees.
I'm ashamed of being a European and seeing how Europe actually is treating these people. We hear numerous times about people getting tortured, girls getting mass raped, people are being sold into slavery, and you see the people back home basically talking about we're bringing the terrorists to Europe.
There have, of course, been attacks that have been linked to refugees. Are you worried then that the governments, the authorities in Europe are actually, if anything, only going to become tougher on how they deal with this problem?
They probably are, absolutely. Of course, that's worrisome. I'm terrified that it will be tougher because right now, people are suffering. They're suffering a lot.
Some are looking to Europe as a place where they can simply build a better life.
I'm going to Europe to work.
Europe is obviously a place that's a lot of people are going to at the moment.
Yeah.
Do you think it has room for everyone?
You know, I'm a Christian. I believe in Greeks. Everybody is not the same. So I believe my luck will shine.
But the medical staff say it's clear to them that many who have come through Libya have suffered.
The patients that we see, there's some very harrowing tales of abuse that has happened. There's people who have been forcibly imprisoned as well, and they carry many injuries from that.
Whatever they are leaving behind, rescue is a moment of relief. A time to savour, because this journey is only the start. Europe will bring its own challenges. Chris Buckler, BBC News, on the Mediterranean Sea.
Let's have a look at some of the day's other news now. And fierce clashes are continuing between government forces and rebels on the southern outskirts of the Syrian city of Aleppo. Activists say that pro-government forces backed by Russian air power have regained ground after a major rebel offensive was launched at the weekend. More armed officers are to be deployed on the streets of London in response to a series of violent attacks recently in Europe. Well, the Metropolitan Police Force has already said it's increasing the number of officers carrying firearms by 600 because of the security situation. Nationally, the threat level hasn't changed and remains at severe. A police officer who worked at Washington's DC's metro station has been charged with attempting to provide support to the Islamic State group. It's claimed that 36-year-old Nicholas Young bought nearly $250 worth of credits for mobile messaging accounts used by IS fighters. South Africans have voted in local elections, seen as a test of the popularity of the governing African National Congress and President Jacob Zuma. Opinion polls suggest the ANC is facing a strong challenge for the first time since the end of apartheid in the key urban centres of Pretoria, Johannesburg and Port Elizabeth. Here's our correspondent, Karen Allen.
This is one of the thousands of townships where millions of South Africans have been casting their vote in an election widely seen as a referendum on the ANC under the leadership of President Jacob Zuma. This is one of the townships where we've seen service delivery protests. These are local government elections, and the things that matter to people are the provision of housing, education and jobs. But these elections could have national implications if the ANC sees its power erode in some key strategic areas. If that is the case, and it's been in power for more than 2 decades, then serious questions could be asked about its leadership. So this is where the people's voice gets heard. 26 million South Africans are eligible to vote in an election where the opposition are threatening to inflict severe damage on the status quo. The big question is whether they can garner sufficient support. 22 years after black South Africans won the right to vote, one of the key things to look out for might also be voter turnout, with some disgruntled voters abstaining altogether rather than switching sides.
Karen Allen reporting there. Now, at least 22 people are missing after a highway bridge connecting the city of Mumbai with the beach resort state of Goa in western India collapsed. Officials said that 2 buses carrying passengers plunged into a flooded river as the bridge came down early on Wednesday. Justin Rowlett reports from the site of the collapse in the state of Maharashtra.
Raging floodwaters tore down a huge section of the bridge on the main road between Goa and Mumbai. Rescue workers say 2 buses were on this bridge when it crashed down into the floodwaters early on Wednesday morning. They believe a number of cars were also swept into the torrent and fear the death toll could exceed 30. Specialist search teams, including expert divers, arrived early this morning, but haven't yet found any trace of the missing people or their vehicles. The water is so strong it could have carried the wreckage for miles, they say, and they are not expecting to find any survivors.
We can't trace those buses. They have not reached their destination. We think a total of 22 people were in the buses.
This is the latest tragedy in a particularly strong monsoon season in South Asia. More than 8.5 million people have been affected and more than 200 killed as floods have hit large parts of India, Bangladesh and Nepal. It is part of what appears to be a pattern of increasingly brutal weather. India recorded its highest ever temperature this summer, more than 50 degrees centigrade. It was the climax of 2 years of drought, which left 300 million people facing water shortages in India alone. This dramatic weather is pushing the region's often crumbling infrastructure to its limit. A crowd has gathered to see the shattered bridge and watch the rescue operation. Experts warn it will take vast investment to avoid tragedies like this if the pattern of extreme weather continues. And today, it is still raining. Justin Rolat, BBC News, Western India.
Just let me remind you of our main news today. And a passenger plane coming in from India has made an emergency landing at the Middle East's busiest airport. All 300 people on board have escaped unharmed, but a firefighter was killed whilst trying to put out the flames. The incident happened at Dubai International Airport to a plane coming in from southern India. That's it. Bye-bye.